But getting straight to it, two questions today, one off Facebook and one from one of the agents that watches us. So the first one, I might paraphrase a bit, but it goes along the lines of, good day, I would like to find out about land we live on. It's a small piece of land which forms part of a larger farm. An initial verbal agreement was that we can build our house while we sort out the title deeds. However, since then, the farm has been sold. Will someone be able to assist me? How would I go about getting a sectional title?
Okay, perfect. So, look, this is one of those questions that there's a lot of moving parts, and there are a lot of questions that I have in relation to the question. So one of the things I just wanted to highlight in a question like this is something to remember for people building homes on other people's land. And the way South African law works in respect of dwellings or buildings that are placed onto other people's land is that the building itself is deemed to accede to the land. Okay, so when something is built on another person's piece of land, what our law deems is that that building, because it's immovable and not a movable thing that can be quickly brought back onto another place, it becomes sort of part of the land and exceeds to the land and becomes the property of that person. Okay, so there is something you want to be very careful about. If you build on other people's land, basically you're building something that becomes theirs. There are legal consequences for someone who has built it. You know, if there is claims for perhaps unjustified enrichment or something like that, you've they've benefited their land, and there might be claims there. But insofar as that is my home, that is something that can be incorrect because it exceeds to the land. So I want to mention that because that is something that would have to be looked at in this particular circumstance. There's also questions in this regard about something called acquisitive prescription. So acquisitive prescription is something in our law that also deals with when someone has lived on a piece of land for an extended period of time, and it's not necessarily a township property. There can be something called acquisitive prescription where people acquire property by means of their undisturbed possession of a property for very lengthy periods, and I'm talking in excess of 20 years. So it was mentioned at the start of the question that this is a farmland. Okay, so that is a sort of a land that acquisitive prescription is a inquiry that you would have to do in the circumstances. So this question's come from Michael, and unfortunately, Michael, the question is just too complex to answer in a short format like this. This is something that you really need to get into the offices of an attorney so that they can look at the circumstances and especially look at the transfer, what exactly happened there, what agreements you had with the previous owner, because you say you had a previous owner, you were going to build a property and you're going to sort out this ownership issue. But now, obviously, that hasn't happened. So that agreement in itself needs to be looked at. And also, importantly, the person that's purchased the property, were they aware of your presence on the property? Were they aware of your potential agreement to purchase the property in the circumstances? Because that's going to have an effect on what happens in the circumstances. So unfortunately, for the purposes of this question, we can't answer it here. What I would do is urge you, please reach out to one of our officers so that we can actually assist you properly in this circumstance and actually have a look into the full facts of the matter before we can provide advice.
So Nick, if you don't mind me stepping in there. So absolutely, I absolutely agree with the issues being experienced, and obviously, like the prescription issue that the client needs to consider, as well as the fact that building a structure on a property does not necessarily entitle you to anything regarding that specific structure, except possibly a claim for undue enrichment, like you mentioned. Now, what I do want to highlight when it comes to questions around the buying and selling of properties, is that people do so properly. And I think this is one of the problems that we experience, especially we experience it a lot in the township areas, and we experience it on farm areas. Now, if there's developers or owners that are looking to divide the property in order to be able to make it available to buyers so that they can buy small little portions for lesser amounts and build their own houses on it, it's a great concept and a great idea, but please be very careful not to buy these properties without actually taking transfer of the land, because there's several ways that one can go about dividing up and almost fractionalizing a larger property. And the one way of doing it is to subdivide. So subdivision is very common, and this is when we normally refer to freestanding houses, where you still have your house, you have a garden, and a rather large piece of land, and you own the entire land. And then we have sectional titles, and sectional titles is basically your right to a portion of a larger piece of land. So both of these concepts are about fractionalizing larger pieces of land, but both of them carry the same risk. If you buy into a property that's purportedly a sectional title, but it hasn't been sectionalized yet, you are at a very, very big risk that if the development is not completed, that the transfer will not go through, and you should not be entering into those contracts unless the sectional title register has been registered at the deeds office. Same with subdivisions. A lot of people will buy property subject to a subdivision, and you can buy the property subject to a subdivision, but please don't part with your money until the subdivision has been completed and there's an attorney that's been appointed to transfer that specific portion of land to you. Because until that point where the subdivision has been completed, you do not know with 100% certainty that the subdivision will even be permissible. And you might have parted with your money only to realize that subdivision was not approved and there will be no fractionalization of the land. Very important.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks for that, Bruno.